The first time they came, the world didn't understand what it was looking at. People thought it was a meteor streaking across the sky with a long, white tail of fire, but meteors didn't slow down and shift directions mid-air. Meteors didn't cut through the clouds like a blade and vanish into the upper atmosphere. I was standing outside that night, leaning on my porch rail with a cigarette burning down to the filter, watching it. Something in my gut told me it wasn't just a rock from space. I'd done enough years in the army to recognize a controlled descent, even if it was wrapped in fire. By morning, news had flooded every channel. Strange booms over Africa, missing livestock in rural areas, whole patches of wilderness gone silent, animals that didn't scare easy. Wolves, bears, even elephants were just gone. Rangers reported carcasses stripped clean, blood sprayed across the ground, as if something had hunted them and taken only what it wanted. At first, humanity treated it like a curiosity. People joked about aliens on talk shows. Conspiracy nuts uploaded shaky videos on the internet, and governments stayed quiet. But those of us who'd been around violence long enough, we could read the signs. Something was testing us. Something was hunting. Weeks passed and the attacks spread. Deer herds in America vanished overnight. Lions in the savannah left shredded, gutted. And then the first humans went missing. Campers, hikers, fishermen, the kind of people who lived close to the edges of civilization, who wouldn't be noticed, missing right away. When their remains were found, it was worse than any murder scene. Torn flesh, cracked bones, precise cuts where organs had been removed. They weren't killing us to survive. They were doing it for sport. I remember the first footage that leaked, the kind of thing governments tried to bury but couldn't. Grainy night vision shots of something tall and armored dragging a man through the trees like he was nothing but a rabbit caught in its snare. The sound of the man screaming echoed long after the figure vanished into the dark. That video scarred me, and I've seen plenty of war. They weren't human, but they moved with the same kind of confidence a soldier has when he knows he's the apex predator on the field. Tall, broad, masked. The armor clung to them like skin, and their weapons were nothing we recognized. Bolts of plasma that cut a tree in half, blades that hissed as if alive. Every detail screamed one thing: we were prey. The governments tried denial, then negotiation, then military response. None of it mattered. Squads sent into the forests didn't come back. Tanks got split open like tin cans. Air patrols were shredded by beams of light that moved faster than radar could track. The hunters didn't want peace. They wanted trophies, and we gave them plenty. At first, the world broke into panic. Cities rioted, people fled, faith collapsed. But somewhere in the chaos, somewhere in the blood and loss, something inside us woke up. The hunters thought they were teaching us fear. Instead, they taught us hate. The first resistance wasn't organized. Farmers set up traps on their land. Hunters tracked the trackers. Old war veterans dusted off their rifles and disappeared into the woods, taking a few of the bastards with them. Humanity learned quickly: we had to, or we'd die. That's when I realized the truth. We weren't the first species they'd done this to. The way they moved, the way they hunted, it was routine, polished, efficient. They'd been at this for centuries, maybe millennia. They had exterminated others, collected bones, Skulls, histories erased, buried in some alien vault, but they had made a mistake. Other species might have rolled over, gone extinct, left nothing but echoes in the dirt. But humanity, we don't go quietly. We've fought each other for as long as we've existed. And that made us something these hunters didn't expect. Dangerous prey. They came to Earth thinking it would be another easy game, another clean hunt, another species to wipe off the ledger. They didn't understand yet. Earth isn't a world you just hunt. Earth fights back. And I swore on the graves of the first to fall, I'd make them learn that. Second time I saw one of them, I was close enough to smell the stench of its armor. It happened in the hills outside my town. A boy had gone missing, 14, maybe 15 years old. His father asked me to help look. I told him we'd probably just find him drunk in a field somewhere, but my gut told me something else. The disappearances had been creeping closer to home, first the livestock, then the dogs, some now kids. We tracked into the woods at dusk, rifles slung across our backs, flashlights taped red to cut the glare. I kept my finger on the trigger. Memory of that night vision video burned into my skull. Every broken branch looked like a sign. Every patch of silence screamed. We found blood before we found the boy, a smear on the bark, spray across the leaves, then his shoe, torn in half like a rag. His father collapsed when he saw it. I kept moving, because I knew what we were walking into. That was when the sound hit us. Clicking metallic rhythm, too sharp to be animal, too uneven to be machine. My hair stood on end. The forest had gone dead quiet, not even crickets singing. Something was out there watching. Then it stepped into the clearing, 8ft. Tall, broad as a bull, its armor rigged and scarred from battles I couldn't imagine. A mask covered its face, black lenses glowing faintly green. Its hands held a spear longer than I was tall, tipped with something that hummed with heat, and hanging from its belt was the boy's head, fresh. The father screamed and charged. He never had a chance. One flick of that spear and the man was cut clean through, falling in two halves at my feet. The hunter didn't even look at him after. It looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be prey. My hands shook, but I raised the rifle anyway. The first shots ricocheted off its armor, useless. It tilted its head, curious, as if studying my weakness. Then it moved. Fast, impossibly fast, covering the distance between us in a heartbeat. The spear swung and I dove sideways, rolling through the leaves. The blade carved the tree behind me. Half like paper, adrenaline did the thinking. I dropped the rifle and pulled my knife. Stupid, I know, a knife against a monster, but I wasn't about to die on my knees. It lunged. I slashed, catching the seam under its arm. For the first time I heard it grunt, pain, surprise. Black fluid sprayed out, hissing where it hit the dirt. It backhanded me across the clearing, bones in my ribs snapping like twigs, but I'd cut it. That mattered. The hunter didn't finish me. It crouched instead, watching me struggle to breathe, blood filling my mouth. And then it let out a low growl, almost like laughter, and melted back into the trees. It could have killed me. It chose not to. I woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed, patched together by some local doc. They said hikers had found me crawling along the road, half dead. They didn't find the father's body. They didn't believe my story, but I knew the truth. They were toying with us, testing us, picking off the weak to study the strong, and I knew something else. They weren't invincible. They could bleed. The first sparks of resistance came from men like me. Soldiers, hunters, farmers, the kind of men who knew how to track, how to fight, how to survive off the land. Governments were paralyzed. Politicians hiding in bunkers. The military stretched thin by failed campaigns. So we stopped waiting for orders. We formed our own units, not armies, packs, small groups, 10 or 12. Men tight enough to move quiet, mean enough to kill loud. We called ourselves wolves because wolves know what it means to be hunted, and they know how to turn the hunt back. We built traps in the forest, pits lined with steel spikes, wire snares strong enough to snap a deer's neck, explosives buried under leaves rigged to trip wires. We studied their movements, learned the rhythms of their patrols. Every time one of them passed, we followed. Not close enough to fight, just close enough to learn. When we struck like fire. The first kill wasn't mine. It was a farmer named Hank, tough old bastard who'd lost both his sons in Afghanistan years back. He rigged his barn with gas tanks and baited it with dead cattle. When the hunter came sniffing, Hank blew the whole place sky high. We found pieces of armor scattered half a mile away. After that, word spread. People started to believe the hunters weren't gods. They weren't untouchable. They could die. And once humanity believes something, we move mountains. Of course, the hunters learned too. They weren't stupid. Every time we took one of theirs, they came back harder. They stopped hunting alone. They came in pairs, in threes. They set their own traps. Villages burned. Overnight, whole towns wiped off the map. For every one of them we killed, they took 100 of us. But numbers don't break us. Pain doesn't break us. We're built on suffering. One night my unit tracked a pair of hunters into the Appalachians. We'd been following their heat signatures for 3 days, watching them string up trophies, bears, elk, even people. We set up in an abandoned mine shaft, rigging the tunnels with enough dynamite to level the ridge. We waited. Hours passed. Then the sound came, their clicking, echoing down the stone. My heart hammered, sweat stung my eyes. They entered one after another, their armor casting ghostly reflections off the rock. I gave the signal. The blast tore the world apart. Fire roared through the tunnels, rock collapsing, dust choking the air. I thought we'd killed them clean, but when the smoke cleared, one was still standing, charred and mangled, but alive. It came for me. The fight was hell. My bullet sparked off its armor. My knife couldn't find the seam. This time it threw me against the wall, ribs cracking again, breath ripped out of my lungs. I thought I was finished. But then Hank, old stubborn Hank, shoved a shotgun into its gut and fired. Point blank, the blast tore through the seams, black blood spraying like oil. The hunter staggered, screeched, then collapsed. We all stood there panting, bleeding, half dead, but we were alive. And it wasn't. We cut off its head and mounted it on a spike outside the mine. Not for glory, not for pride, but for proof that they could fall, proof that Earth wasn't done yet. And for the first time I saw fear in their eyes. The war dragged on. Cities became battlegrounds. Forests became graveyards. Hunters adapted, but so did we. Every trick they played, we stole and turned back on them. Their plasma weapons became ours when we pried them from their corpses. Their armor was stripped, studied, broken down. We learned faster than they expected. That was humanity's gift, our curse maybe. We learn, we fight dirty, we don't stop. I lost men, good men. Hank was one of them. We buried him on a ridge where he'd once hunted deer, his shotgun across his chest. Before he died, he looked me in the eyes and said, "Make them pay." I swore I would, and I was. Alone, resistance groups rose. Everywhere, South America, Europe, Africa, men and women who refused to kneel, farmers, soldiers, criminals, priests. The hunters came for trophies. Instead, they got war. The galaxy had forgotten what humans were. They'd seen prey. They were about to see predators. And I knew deep down the day would come when the hunters would regret stepping foot on Earth because they thought they'd hunted every species. They hadn't hunted us, not yet. The thing about hunters is they think in straight lines. They stalk, they kill. They collect their predators, apex predators, sure, but even the deadliest predator can be outsmarted by prey that refuses to run in the same direction. Humans, we weren't born with claws or armor. We were born with brains, hands, and desperation. That was enough. By the third month of their invasion, the world had stopped pretending governments could save us. The military fought, but the hunters cut through armored divisions like wheat. Missiles locked on, but their ships blinked out of range before the warheads got close. Air support crumbled, but in the shadows, in the ruins, in the forests and the fields, resistance was growing teeth. I remember the night we stopped being just survivors. We had been following a group of hunters for weeks, tracking their kills. They'd made a nest outside Pittsburgh. An old stadium turned into a slaughterhouse. We found it by the stench first, burnt flesh, blood, rot. When we scouted inside, the seats were lined with bones, not just human animals, aliens too, skulls polished and displayed like trophies, and hanging in the center of the field, gutted and strung up like some sick prize, was a man, a soldier. His dog tag still clung to his neck. Something snapped in us. That night, it wasn't enough to run, to hide, to take scraps of victory. We wanted to make them hurt. We drew up a plan, not complicated, not pretty. Blow the nest sky high, kill as many of the bastards as we could, and make damn sure they knew who did it. We spent 3 days wiring explosives under the stands, fuel tanks from abandoned cars, dynamite stolen from mines, homemade Molotovs, every piece of firepower we could scrape together. The hardest part wasn't setting the trap, it was waiting for them to come back. When they did, there were 5 of them, tall, armored, carrying the spoils of a fresh hunt. One dragged a deer carcass, another held a human head. They walked into that stadium like kings coming home to their throne. That's when we lit the fuse. The blast tore the night apart. Concrete split, fire ripped through the stands. Steel screamed as it bent and collapsed. The hunters staggered, caught off guard, their armor scorched and smoking. Then we opened fire. Bullets cracked through the flames. 2 hunters dropped fast, riddled with holes where the armor had split. Another roared, charging through the fire, plasma spear raised. He skewered one of my men clean through, lifting him off the ground like a ragged doll. But before he could pull the spear free, I emptied my magazine into his face plate. The mask shattered, and I saw it, the thing underneath. Not a god, not a demon, just flesh and bone. Its eyes were yellow, its mouth full of mandibles, its blood black and thick. It stumbled, screamed, and fell. The last 2 tried to run, but we didn't let them. We hunted them through the wreckage, through the burning bones of their trophies, until the last one was cornered against a collapsed wall. It clicked and growled, but there was no pride left in it, no arrogance, just desperation. We shot it to pieces. When it was over, we stood in the ruins of that stadium, smoke choking the air, fire painting the sky. For the first time since this all began, we weren't prey anymore. We were predators. That night spread like wildfire. The Pittsburgh strike, they called it. Later, proof that we could fight back. Proof that we could win. And the hunters noticed. After Pittsburgh, everything changed. Resistance cells started linking up. What used to be scattered bands of desperate men became something bigger. Networks, communication lines, supply chains. Engineers who had once built cars now stripped alien tech for weapons. Doctors stitched up fighters. Basement and barns, farmers grew food for men who hadn't seen their families in months. We weren't just packs of wolves anymore. We were packs of wolves. Learning to hunt together, I found myself pulled into leadership whether I wanted it or not. Men looked to me because I'd lived through the worst of it, because I had scars to prove it. I wasn't smarter, stronger, or braver. I was just stubborn enough to keep breathing. Our strategy was simple: hit and fade. Guerrilla war, strike their patrols, sabotage their ships, bleed them slow, make Earth cost more than it was worth. But the hunters weren't fools. They adapted too. They brought heavier weapons, drones, floating metal spheres with sensors that cut through smoke and dark. They deployed hunting packs in the cities, flushing survivors into the open. They burned safe houses to the ground, leaving black skeletons of buildings where families once lived. And every time we struck, they retaliated harder. Towns wiped clean, villages turned into ash. I started losing men faster than I could bury them. One night we were ambushed outside Detroit. We'd rigged a highway overpass with explosives, waiting to collapse it on a hunter convoy, but they knew, somehow. They knew. The first volley hit us before we even saw them. Plasma ripped through the dark, men screaming as they burned alive. I dove behind a wrecked truck, heart pounding, ears ringing. Shapes moved in the shadows. 3 hunters, armored heavy, their masks glowing faint green. They advanced slow, methodical, cutting down anyone who moved. I had 1 shot left. I waited until the nearest passed the wreck. Its back to me. I rose, pressed the barrel against the seam in its armor, and fired. The blast tore through, black blood spraying across my face. The thing shrieked and spun, but I drove my knife into its throat before it could strike. It collapsed, thrashing. The other 2 roared and came at me. I ran, not because I wanted to, because survival was the only victory left in that moment. I dove into the sewer tunnels beneath the highway, the smell choking me as I crawled through the filth. Behind me, the tunnels shook as they fired into the ground, trying to flush me out, but they didn't follow. Not into the dark, not into the unknown. That was when I realized something. They hunted in the open, in the forests, in the ruins, but they didn't like tight spaces, didn't like the dark holes we called home. They were predators built for dominance, not for shadows, and that gave us an edge. We shifted tactics. After that, we stopped fighting them where they were strong. No more open fields, no more highways. We dragged them underground, into sewers, into mines, into tunnels, places where their size and their arrogance turned into weakness. I'll never forget the look on one of their faces, if you could call it a vase, the first time we lured it into a mine shaft and collapsed the entrance. Behind it trapped, cut off for the first time, one of them understood what it felt like to be prey. We butchered it. Slow, not for cruelty, for the message. When we sent its headless corpse back to their camp, we left a note carved into its armor, one word: hunted. The hunters escalated again. They stopped taking trophies, stopped playing their game. The sport was over. This was war now. They deployed warships into the skies, blockading cities, hammering the ground with bombardments. They flooded the forests with fire. They scorched fields and poisoned rivers. If they couldn't collect us, they would starve us, but Earth is stubborn. For every city they burned, 10 new cells rose from the ashes. For every family they slaughtered, 100 more men took up arms, and for every hunter that landed on our soil, we made sure at least one never walked away. We were paying in blood, yes, but so were they. And the galaxy must have been watching, because whispers started to spread about Earth, about humanity, about prey that fought back. I didn't know if it was true or just hope, but some said other species had survived in hiding, that they watched us rise from the dirt and decided maybe extinction wasn't inevitable. Maybe the hunters weren't invincible. If that was true, then humanity wasn't just fighting for Earth. We were fighting for everyone they'd ever hunted. I still remember one of my last conversations with Hank before he died. He'd sat by the fire cleaning his shotgun, his hands shaking from age, but steady with purpose. "You know what makes us different from them?" he asked. I shrugged. "We bleed easier," he laughed, coughed hard enough to spit blood. "Nah, it's that we don't know when to quit. Every animal runs when it's beaten, not us. We fight even when it's hopeless, especially when it's hopeless." He was right. That was the only thing keeping us alive. Stubbornness. We weren't the strongest. We weren't the fastest. We weren't armored gods with plasma spears. We were just men crawling through the dirt, bleeding in the dark, refusing to stop. And that refusal, that was what scared them. By the 6th month, the hunters had lost more on Earth than on any world they'd ever touched. They weren't used to that. They weren't used to prey that dug in, prey that learned, prey that turned the tables. And I knew deep in my gut that the balance was shifting. They'd come to Earth expecting trophies. They were leaving Earth with scars, but I wasn't satisfied with scars. I wanted them to remember Earth every time they closed their eyes. I wanted them to whisper our name in their alien tongue, like a curse. Because we weren't just prey anymore. We were the hunt, and I wasn't going to stop until every last one of them understood that. The hunters thought they were bleeding us out. 6 months of fire and slaughter had burned whole countries to ash. Cities were charred skeletons, highways torn apart, rivers poisoned, millions dead, more missing. But here's what they didn't understand. Humanity doesn't die neat. We don't just lie down and wait for the end. We crawl. We bite, we spit blood and keep moving. And by the 7th month, we weren't just packs of wolves anymore. We were a pack of nations. It started with a rumor. Some engineers down in Brazil had cracked one of their weapons, pulled it apart piece by piece, figured out how the plasma cores were fueled, rewired it into something a man could carry. They called it a torch rifle. It kicked like a mule, overheated after 5 shots, and sometimes blew up in your hands, but it cut through hunter armor like butter. When word spread, resistance cells from all over sent men to learn, old. Mechanics, electricians, soldiers turned. Tinkerers. Whole villages dedicated themselves to tearing down every scrap of alien tech we could salvage. I'll never forget the first time I held one of those rifles, heavy, ugly, stitched together from scavenged parts and alien guts, but when I pulled the trigger and saw a tree trunk sliced in half like paper, I grinned for the first time. Since this nightmare began, I felt like we had teeth, and it wasn't just Brazil. In Russia, they rigged stolen hunter drones to scout their own patrols. In Africa, tribes that had hunted lions for generations began hunting the hunters. Spears tipped with scavenged plasma shards. In Europe, resistance cells dug underground cities, entire networks of bunkers connected by tunnels the hunters wouldn't dare enter. Piece by piece, the world was arming itself. Not with governments, not with armies, with survivors. Our first coordinated strike came outside Chicago. The hunters had turned the city into a nest. Their ship hovered above the skyline, blotting out the sun. Drones patrolling the streets like mechanical vultures. Survivors had been rounded up and dragged into camps. Meat for their games. We couldn't let it stand. 3 cells came together for the strike. Mine, the Brazilians with their torch rifles, and a group of ex-Marines led by a man named Turner. Hard bastard, scarred down his face, missing an eye but sharp as a blade. He took one look at me and said, "You're the one who cut one open with a knife, right?" "Got lucky," I told him. He smirked. "Luck's a weapon too." We spent 2 weeks planning, mapping patrol routes, hacking their drones, wiring explosives under the bridges. Every move had to be precise. We weren't just fighting 1 or 2 of them this time. We were going after their nest. The night of the strike, the air was heavy, charged with fear and rage. I remember standing in the ruins of an office building, torch rifle in my hands, watching their ship hover over the city like a black moon. Turner gave the signal and Chicago went to war. The first explosions tore through the drone patrols. Sparks lit the sky, metal raining down into the street. Civilians beaten and starved in the camps rose up with whatever they had, pipes, knives, even fists. The hunters roared as their prey turned feral. We moved fast. My unit hit the southern camp, cutting through the gates with charges. The torch rifles screamed, slicing through armor, leaving blackened holes in hunter chests. One of the bastards turned on me, spear raised, but before it could strike, a kid no older than 16 leapt from the shadows and buried a stolen plasma shard into its thigh. The thing toppled, howling, and we finished it. Everywhere I turned, fire and chaos, hunters bellowing, humans screaming, the city itself collapsing under the fury. Then Turner made his move. He led his men into the skyscraper nearest the hovering ship. They'd rigged the top floors with enough explosives to level half the block. The plan was suicide. But Turner didn't care. He wanted to drag that ship down if it killed him. I saw him one last time standing in the shattered windows, rifle in one hand, detonator in the other. A hunter charged him, plasma blade glowing, but Turner didn't flinch. He raised the detonator, grinned, and pressed the button. The explosion lit the night like a second sun. The skyscraper folded in on itself, flames clawing into the sky, debris tearing into the hovering ship. For the first time, I heard it groan. Not a mechanical sound, a living one. Like a beast in pain, the ship buckled, tilted, and then it fell. When it hit the ground, the shock wave flattened. Half the city, hunters screamed as their fortress became their tomb. And Chicago roared. The cost was brutal. Turner and his men were gone, buried in the fire, half our cell wiped out. Civilians slaughtered in the crossfire. But we had done the impossible. We'd taken down one of their ships. The news spread faster than fire across the world. Survivors heard it whispered in the ruins. Chicago stands. And the hunters, they bled. For the first time in their endless history of conquest, they had lost not just prey, not just trophies, but territory. We saw it in the way they moved afterward, not with arrogance, not with confidence, with caution. We'd cut them, and they hated us for it. Retaliation was merciless. Within days, their ships descended on every major city still standing: New York, London, Tokyo, Rio. They burned them, not for trophies, not for sport, for revenge. Entire skylines turned to ash, millions more dead. But here's what they didn't get: destruction doesn't break us, it forges us. Every city they burned, every family they slaughtered, every drop of blood they spilled, it only made more men rise. For every Turner who fell, 10 more picked up his rifle. The hunters thought they'd crushed our spirit. Instead, they'd given us unity. For the first time in history, the world wasn't divided by borders or flags. We were just human, and we wanted blood. Resistance grew bolder. We hit them everywhere at once. Mines in South Africa turned into ambush zones. Trains in India carried explosives straight into their convoys. Guerrilla snipers in the Rockies picked them off one by one. I led raids through the sewers of Philadelphia, torch rifle strapped to my back, knife in my teeth. Every time we killed one, we stripped it bare. Armor, weapons, tech. Every time we struck, we learned. One night we captured one alive. It had been wounded in a skirmish, its leg torn to shreds by an IED. My men dragged it into the tunnels, chained it against the wall. The thing towered over us, even sitting down. Mandibles clicking, eyes burning yellow. I looked it in the face and asked, "Why us?" It didn't answer, of course, but the way it stared at me told me enough. To them, it wasn't why. It was never why. It was just the hunt. That was all the reason they needed. So we gave it a reason to fear. We cut its throat and sent its head back to its patrol with the same word carved into its mask. Hunted. By the 9th month, the hunters were pulling back from the smaller towns. They abandoned some of their camps, retreating into their ships, striking only from the skies. They weren't winning anymore. They were stalling, and the world felt it. Hope is a dangerous thing. It spreads faster than fire, and once it's lit, you can't put it out. Men who had given up started fighting again. Civilians joined raids. Even children carried messages through the ruins, slipping past patrols with notes clutched in their hands. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were pushing. But hope comes with a price. The more victories we claimed, the harder they hit back, and in their fury they stopped caring about trophies, about honor, about the hunt. They started using something new. Bombs, not fire, not plasma, something worse. Whole regions blackened overnight. The air thick with poison, the soil dead. Survivors stumbled out of the fog, coughing blood, skin blistered, eyes burned. We called it the ash. The hunters had decided that if they Couldn't claim Earth, they'd ruin it. Burn the prey and the planet both, and that's when the fight stopped being just about survival. It became about legacy. We weren't just fighting to live another day, we were fighting to make sure Earth itself survived, that when the dust settled, the hunters wouldn't own our bones, our soil, our sky. I stood one night on the ruins of a skyscraper, torch rifle in my hands, watching their ships hover on the horizon, my ribs still locked from the last fight, my body scarred and broken, but inside something burned hotter than any plasma fire. We had given them a war they didn't expect, and I knew as long as one of us still drew breath, Earth would never fall, because they thought they hunted every species. They didn't hunt us, not really, not until now, and they had no idea what they'd unleashed. Victory has a strange taste, sweet at first, sharp and addicting, but the aftertaste is bitter. You start thinking you're invincible. You start thinking maybe all the blood and ash is worth it. That was the trap we walked into. We thought Chicago had changed everything. We thought taking down one of their ships meant we could take down all of them. For the first time since this nightmare began, men were laughing again, smiling, making plans for a world after the hunters were gone. That was when they broke us. It started with whispers of betrayal. Supplies had gone missing, ammo crates vanishing overnight, fuel siphoned from hidden caches, encrypted comms leaking. At first we blamed fear, desperate men hoarding for their families, but then whole cells started disappearing, not just scattered, not ambushed, wiped clean. No survivors, no retreat. That kind of precision only came from inside knowledge. Someone was feeding the hunters. I wanted to believe it wasn't true. Humanity had finally come together. We'd bled side by side, buried our dead in the same dirt, but desperation does ugly things to men, and the hunters knew how to twist a knife. The truth came out. Outside Warsaw, we'd gathered 3 cells for a strike on one of their fuel stations. Alien constructs pulsing with sick green light, guarded by a dozen hunters. The plan was solid. We'd hit them from 3 sides, torch rifles at the ready, explosives buried under the mud. But when we moved in, they were waiting, not patrolling, not caught off guard, waiting. The first volley shredded us. Plasma fire ripped through the dark, men screaming as they burned. Explosions lit the night, not from our charges, but from hidden mines we'd never planted. We were herded, funneled into kill zones. By the time we fought our way clear, half my men were dead, the other half broken and bleeding, and in the wreckage we found proof. Hunter tech, comms gear wired into one of our packs. Somebody had been broadcasting our movement straight to them. Betrayal wasn't a rumor anymore, it was fact. That night I sat by the fire with my knife in my hand, staring at the men still breathing. None of us spoke, none of us trusted. Every face looked like an enemy. Whoever it is, one of the younger fighters spat. We got him, making example. Another shook his head. What if they've already got to him? What if it's not his fault? I said nothing. My ribs still ached, my scars burned, but none of that hurt like this. Fighting monsters was simple. Fighting men, our own men, was poison. I'd seen war turn brother against brother before, but this time the knife wasn't just in our backs, it was in our hearts. The betrayal gutted morale. Cells stopped sharing intel. Supply lines broke down. Men turned on each other in the ruins. killing over scraps, accusing their brothers of treason. The hunters didn't even need to fight, they just watched as we unraveled ourselves, and then they struck. It happened in Moscow. We'd been told it was a safe zone. Underground tunnels, bunkers stacked with supplies, families hidden deep. Below, word spread fast and thousands of survivors started flocking there. I should have smelled the trap, too clean, too easy, but when you've seen nothing but death, hope makes you blind. We marched 3 days to reach it, families clutched bags of food, children carried on shoulders, men dragging carts of weapons. We thought we were walking to salvation. Instead, we walked into hell. The tunnels were real, the supplies were real, but the hunters were waiting. The first sign was the smell, burnt flesh drifting through the shafts, then the sound, the clicks echoing off stone, and then the screams. They came from every tunnel, every direction, plasma fire tearing through the dark. Families fell. First, children. The hunters didn't take trophies this time, they slaughtered. I fought until my rifle jammed, then with my knife, then with my fists. Blood and smoke filled the air so thick I couldn't see. Men fell around me, some screaming, some silent, and then the ceiling came down. Explosives, alien charges planted. Long before we arrived, the tunnels collapsed, burying thousands alive. I clawed my way through the rubble with broken nails and bleeding hands. When I finally emerged into the night, the city behind me was burning, not just burning, screaming. I'll never forget the sound. Not of men, not of women, not of children, but of silence. After it was done, Moscow was gone. I stumbled into the woods alone, half dead, my clothes soaked in blood that wasn't mine. For the first time since this started, I wanted to give up, just lie down close my eyes and let the world bury me too. But then I remembered Turner. I remembered Hank. I remembered the boy whose head I'd seen dangling from a hunter's belt. I remembered the graves, and I couldn't stop. The next weeks were worse than anything before. Survivors scattered, hunted like rats, cells too paranoid to work together, men whispering about the traitor in our midst, about who would be next to sell us out. The hunters fed that fear, dropping supplies into the ruins, broadcasting messages in broken human tongue, promises of safety for those who surrendered, of food for those who obeyed, and men listened. I watched one of my fighters walk out into the open with his rifle raised high, shouting for mercy. They gutted him before he finished his sentence, left his corpse hanging from a tree as a warning. Mercy was never an option. I started moving alone, a wolf without a pack, safer that way. No one to betray, no one to bury, just me, my rifle, and the dark. But even alone I kept fighting, sniping hunters from the shadows, rigging their patrols with mines, carving hunted into their armor. Before slipping away, each kill was hollow, though each victory tasted of ash, because deep down I knew the truth. Humanity was breaking, not from the hunters, from ourselves. Then came the message, a scratchy radio signal, barely more than static. At first I thought it was nothing, but buried in the noise was a voice, human, coordinated offensive, global strike. I froze, my chest tightened. Could it be real? The voice repeated, stronger this time, a call to arms, a message to every surviving cell. Come together one last time for a united push, not just raids, not just survival, a war. The location, Berlin. The time, 1 month. It felt Like madness, after everything after. Betrayal and slaughter after Moscow's grave, the idea of uniting again was insane. But insanity was all we had left, and in my gut I knew if we didn't rise now, we'd never rise again. The road to Berlin was a graveyard, burnt to villages, fields of bones, hunters, hanging corpses from trees like decorations. Every step reminded me of what we'd lost, but every step also reminded me why I kept walking. By the time I reached the outskirts, I wasn't alone anymore. Other survivors had come too. Dirty, scarred, half dead, but breathing. Farmers, soldiers, criminals, priests, men with nothing left to lose. For the first time since Chicago, I felt something in my chest I hadn't felt in months. Hope. In Berlin, the last of the leaders gathered, hardened men from every corner of the world, scarred faces, missing limbs, eyes that had seen too much. We stood in the ruins of a cathedral, its stained glass shattered, its altar blackened with smoke. One of them, a Russian missing an arm, spoke first. The hunters think we're broken. They think we're finished. He slammed his fist on the altar. We show them Earth is not prey. Another, a Brazilian engineer, held up a torch rifle. Rebuilt, improved, sleek as steel. We've learned, we've adapted, we fight with their weapons now. I stepped forward. My voice was raw, ragged, but steady. We've buried too many to quit. We don't fight for survival anymore. We fight for revenge. The men roared, and in that moment, the ruins of a city, I felt it. The world was no longer a scattered pack of wolves. We were a legion, and for the first time we weren't planning to run. We were planning to hunt. Berlin was nothing but bones when we marched into it. The skyline was jagged teeth of ruined buildings, smoke rising from the rubble like the city itself still smoldered, streets cracked and burned, cars rusted and twisted, corpses buried beneath the stone. But the cathedral still stood, scarred, gutted, roof half collapsed but standing. And that was enough. It became our war room. Men from every corner of Earth packed into its broken hall. Farmers with dirt still under their nails, soldiers with scars across their faces, engineers, doctors, even thieves who had survived by stealing scraps and now offered their hands to the cause. No flags, no borders, no nations, just men. And for the first time since the sky had burned, we weren't whispering about survival. We were planning a war. The plan was madness. That was how we knew it had a chance. The hunters had clustered their ships across Europe, stations feeding into each other, pulsing with green energy that lit the night sky. Their stronghold sat in the heart of Berlin itself, what was left of the government quarter, now gutted and twisted into an alien fortress. That was the target. The fortress powered the ships above. Break it, and the blockade faltered. Break it, and humanity had its first real victory. We weren't just hitting it from one side, we were hitting it from all of them. Cells from Russia, France, Africa, South America, every surviving group converging on one point, coordinated through stolen hunter comms, encrypted ways their machines still didn't understand. It wasn't going to be pretty. It wasn't going to be clean. It was going to be blood and fire, but it was going to be ours. The night before the strike, I sat outside the cathedral, rifle across my lap, knife in my hands. The city was silent, waiting. One of the younger men, barely old enough to shave, sat beside me. His name was Thomas, I'd seen him fight, reckless, fearless, the kind of courage only the young could muster. "You think we can win?" he asked. I didn't lie. "I think we can make them bleed." He nodded, eyes hard. "That's enough." I studied him in the firelight. He reminded me of the boy I'd seen hanging from a hunter's belt months ago. Same age, same eyes. That memory burned in my chest, but I pushed it down. Tomorrow Thomas would be another soldier. Tomorrow none of us would be boys or men, just hunters. Dawn broke over the ruins, the sky gray and heavy. We moved out in silence, hundreds of us slipping through the rubble, torch rifles strapped to our backs, explosives in our packs, no drums, no banners, just the steady march of men who had nothing left to lose. The fortress rose ahead, a jagged structure of black stone and green light pulsing like a wound in the earth. Hunters patrolled its walls, their armor gleaming, their masks clicking. Drones circled overhead, scanning the ruins, and above it all their ships hovered, massive, dark, blotting out the sun. I felt the weight of it press down on me. But I didn't stop. None of us did. We weren't prey anymore. We were coming for blood. The first wave struck at noon. Cells from Russia detonated charges beneath the streets, collapsing tunnels and cutting off their patrols. South American fighters stormed from the east, torch rifles blazing, explosives ripping through drones. From the west, African war bands surged, screaming battle cries, their spears tipped with plasma shards. And from the south we came. The streets erupted into fire. Hunters roared, their plasma weapons tearing through buildings, their spears slicing through men. But we didn't stop. For every man who fell, two more surged forward. I led my unit through the wreckage of an old government building, climbing stairs that barely held our weight. From the roof we rained fire down on their patrols, torch rifles cutting arcs of green through the smoke. One hunter spotted us, leaping 3 stories in a single bound, landing on the roof with a crash that shook the stone. It came at me, spear raised, eyes burning yellow. I dove aside as its blade carved the air, heat blistering my skin. My knife flashed, finding the seam in its armor, plunging deep into its side. Black blood sprayed, hissing as it ate into the stone. It grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off my feet. My vision blurred, lungs burning. I clawed at its mask, at its eyes, until Thomas leapt onto its back, driving a torch rifle into the crack I'd carved. The blast blew it apart, black gore showering the roof. I collapsed, coughing, gasping for breath. Thomas grinned, blood running down his face. "Told you we'd win." I wanted to tell him it wasn't over, that it had only just begun, but I just nodded, because in that moment, with fire raging around us, it felt true. The fortress gates fell by nightfall. Explosives tore them apart, shockwave flattening everything within 100 ft. We surged through the wreckage, screaming, firing, cutting down anything that moved. Inside, the air was thick with green mist, walls pulsing with alien light. Trophies lined the halls, skulls, bones, hides of creatures I couldn't name. The hunters had made this place their shrine, their monument to the hunt. We turned it into a slaughterhouse. Room by room, hall by hall, we cleared them out. Torch rifles screamed, blades flashed, men roared. Hunters fell one after another, their arrogance shattered. But we paid for every inch. Men burned alive, men cut in half, men screaming as plasma bolts tore through their bodies. I lost Thomas in those halls. He was Ahead of me, rifle blazing, cutting down. A hunter that had cornered us, he didn't see the second one, stepping from the shadows, spear raised. I shouted. He turned too late. The blade punched through his chest, the light dying in his eyes before he hit the ground. I killed the bastard that took him, carving its mask off with my knife, cutting until its scream stopped. But when I looked back at Thomas, I knew he was just another grave. By midnight, the fortress burned. Explosions tore through its core, the green light fading, the walls collapsing. Above us, the ships shuddered, their power flickering. One by one, they fell from the sky, crashing into the earth. With thunder that shook the world, the hunters roared in fury, but their fury wasn't enough. Not this time. This time, we didn't just survive, we won. The cost was staggering. Half of us dead, the rest broken and bleeding. Berlin was a graveyard of men and monsters alike. But when the fires died and the smoke cleared, we stood in the ruins of their fortress. We had broken them. For the first time, the hunters had lost not just prey, not just trophies, but a war. And the world knew it. In the days that followed, word spread across the ruins of Earth. Survivors whispered it, shouted it, carved it into walls. Berlin stands. Cells that had hidden too long rose again. Men who had given up picked up rifles. The hunted were now hunters. The hunters themselves changed. No more arrogance, no more slow stalking. Now they struck fast, desperate, reckless. Because for the first time in their endless history of conquest, they knew fear, and fear makes even the strongest bleed. But as I stood in the ruins of Berlin, blood soaking my hands, Thomas's face burned into my memory, I felt no triumph. We'd won, yes, but victory is just another word for survival bought with corpses. And I knew the truth. This wasn't the end, not yet. Berlin was just the beginning. Because they thought they had hunted every species, they hadn't seen the real hunt yet, and we were just getting started. After Berlin, the world woke up. The hunters thought burning Moscow had broken us. They thought their poisons, their fire, their trophies had shattered our will. But Berlin proved something they never expected. Prey doesn't just survive. Prey learns. Prey adapts. Prey fights back. The cathedral ruins became our command center. Not governments, not generals, just survivors. Scarred men who'd buried too many, men who had no families left, men with nothing in their chests but rage. We didn't call it an army. Armies needed structure, discipline, uniforms. This was different. This was chaos sharpened into a blade. We called it the Legion. And the Legion was going to burn the hunters out of our world. The first targets were their nests. They had built them everywhere. In stadiums, in factories, in city squares, black fortresses of alien stone, pulsing with green light, reeking of blood. They thought these were symbols of power. We made them symbols of fear. In Paris, fighters tunneled under the nest, planting charges that collapsed the whole structure into the catacombs. Beneath, in Cairo, we lured a hunting party into the desert where the heat and sand swallowed their armor until they suffocated. In Espalo, men stormed their nest with nothing but Molotovs and machetes, cutting them down in alleys too narrow for their spears. Every victory spread like fire, and every victory cost us. In Paris, the tunnels collapsed before our men could escape. In Cairo, half the fighters died in the desert before the hunters did. In Paulo, the streets ran red with blood, ours and theirs. We didn't care. Death was the only currency. Left and we spent it gladly, I led. Strikes across Germany, we hit there. Patrols in the forests, their drones in. The skies, their convoys on the roads. We fought like wolves, hit hard, vanish. Bleed them slow, every man carried not. Just weapons but fire, fire to burn. Their trophies, their tech, they're dead. If they wanted earth, they'd get it in. Flames, but the more we bled them, the more desperate they became, they stopped. Hunting alone, packs of 6, 8, 10 at a time now patrolled the ruins, they brought heavier weapons, cannons that split buildings in half, bombs that left craters where towns used to be. And worst of all, they started taking prisoners again, not for trophies, for something else, something darker. We found out in Warsaw, one of their convoys had been ambushed by another cell before we arrived. The hunters were dead, their bodies burned, but the cages they left behind were full, dozens of men, women, and children, their eyes hollow, their skin burned, some were missing limbs, some had been cut open, stitched back together with alien wire. They weren't collecting trophies anymore, they were experimenting. I remember one man, barely alive, whispering through bloody lips, "They want to know why we don't break." That night we put every survivor out of their misery, quick, clean. Mercy was the only gift we had left to give, and I swore then more than ever, if they wanted to know why we didn't break, I'd show them. The Legion grew bolder, not just raids now, offensives, coordinated strikes across continents. We used their weapons against them. Torch rifles became common, refined by engineers who learned to keep them from overheating. Stolen drones patrolled our skies, feeding us their movements. Armor was stripped from their corpses, patched onto our own bodies. We were still men, still fragile, still bleeding, but we wore their skin like war paint. And the hunters began to falter, for the first time we saw them retreat, not far, not many, but enough to taste it. Patrol cornered in the Alps broke ranks and fled into the snow. A fortress in Madrid was abandoned overnight, the hunters vanishing into the skies. They were predators. They weren't supposed to run, but they were running. Of course, nothing comes without a price. The more ground we took, the more they retaliated, and when they couldn't beat us in the field, they struck at what we loved most, hope. In Africa, they dropped fire from the skies, burning fields of crops, starving whole regions. In Asia, they poisoned rivers, leaving thousands to die, choking on black water. In America, they unleashed something new, creatures, beasts bred for war, released from their ships into the wild. We called them hounds. They were fast, too fast, taller than a man, armored in scales, jaws wide enough to tear through steel. They hunted in packs, sniffing out survivors, dragging them screaming into the dark. I lost 3 men to the hounds in a single night. By morning the snow was red, and their bodies were gone. But we learned like we always did. We set traps, we poisoned meat, we broke the hounds the way we'd break any beast. And when one fell, we skinned it, wore its hide into battle, sent its corpse back to the hunters with the same word carved into its flesh, hunted. By the 10th month, the war wasn't just survival anymore. It was momentum. Every man carried not just weapons, but stories of Moscow, of Chicago, of Berlin, stories of resistance and revenge. Every death became legend, every sacrifice fuel. I became a symbol. Whether I wanted it or not, men whispered my name in the ruins, told Stories of how I'd cut a hunter with a knife, how I'd crawled out of Moscow's grave, how I'd led the charge in Berlin. I wasn't a hero. I was just alive, but in war, sometimes being alive is enough. Then came the turning point, in Poland. Engineers cracked something bigger than a rifle. They cracked a ship, a scout craft smaller than the warships above. Had crashed in the forest. The hunters had abandoned it, thinking it useless. But our engineers tore it apart, studied every wire, every circuit, every core. And they made it fly. When I first saw it rise from the tree, smoke still trailing from its engines, I felt something in my chest I hadn't felt since before the war. Possibility. If we could fly one, we could fly more. If we could fly more, we could take the fight off the ground. We could bring the war to their skies. We could hunt them where they thought they were untouchable. The plan was madness, like all our plans. Take Berlin as our base, strip every ship we could down to the bones, rebuild them with human hands, fly them with human pilots. We didn't have training, we didn't have manuals, we had desperation, and desperation builds faster than any army. Men lined up to volunteer, soldiers, pilots, even farmers who had never left the ground. They didn't care if they didn't come back, they just wanted to hurt the bastards before they died. I was one of them. I'd spent my life on the ground, bleeding in the dirt, but when I saw that ship rise into the sky, I knew I wanted to see their faces when Earth's prey came for them in the heavens. The first flight was chaos. The controls weren't built for human hands. The engine screamed, the hull rattled, the air filled with the stink of burning metal. But when we rose above the ruins of Berlin, higher than the smoke, higher than the fire, I saw the world below me, scarred, bleeding, broken, but alive. And for the first time I saw their ships not as gods, not as shadows blotting out the sun. I saw them as targets. The Legion's first sky strike came over the ruins of Rome. A warship hovered above the Colosseum, its green light pulsing like a heartbeat. Survivors below cowered in the shadows, too afraid to move. We came screaming out of the clouds in stolen craft, engines burning, weapons blazing. The hunters never saw it coming. Our first volley tore through the warship's engines. Flames erupted, metal screaming as it tilted, crashing into the ruins below. The blast leveled half the city, fire rising to the heavens. Men on the ground rose from the shadows, screaming, cheering, crying. For the first time, we weren't just fighting them, we were chasing them. But victory never comes clean. 2 of our ships didn't make it back, one torn apart by plasma fire, another crashing into the sea. Dozens of men burned alive, their screams echoing in my ears. Long after the fight was over, I saw one ship go down, trailing smoke. The pilot still fighting to steer it away from the civilians below. He hit the ground in field, fire swallowing him whole. His last act was saving lives. His last act was mercy. That was humanity. That was why we didn't break. The hunters began to retreat, not everywhere, not all at once, but piece by piece. Their ships pulled higher into the skies, their patrols thinned, their fortresses burned. They weren't leaving yet, but they were bleeding, and they knew it. I stood one night on the roof of a ruined building in Berlin, watching our stolen ships rise into the stars, fire trailing behind them. My body ached, my scars burned, my soul weighed heavy with the names of the dead. But inside I felt something else. We weren't just prey anymore. We weren't even wolves. We were Something they had never seen before. Something they didn't understand. We were hunters, and for the first time in their endless history, the galaxy's greatest predators were afraid. Space wasn't meant for men like us. We were dirt, blood-soaked, bred from mud and stone and fire. But war doesn't care what you're meant for. War drags you where you don't belong and dares you to survive. That's how I found myself strapped into a stolen hunter ship, my hands on controls not built for human flesh, my chest tight as the engines roared and the ground fell away. The sky opened black and endless, stars sharp as knives and waiting there like vultures. Above a corpse were their warships. Dozens, hundreds, this was it, the end. One way or another, the Legion had gathered everything for this strike. Every ship we'd stolen, every weapon we'd built, every man who still had the strength to crawl into a cockpit. Berlin had been our rallying point, our forge. Now it was our launch pad. We weren't just fighting for survival anymore. Survival had cost too much. We were fighting for revenge, for Turner, for Hank, for Thomas, for Moscow, for every nameless corpse hanging from their belts. If Earth was going to burn, we'd burn it on our terms. The plan was simple, like all our plans. Simple didn't mean easy. The hunters' stronghold hung in orbit, a massive structure like a crown of black metal, pulsing with green veins of energy. It powered their fleets, controlled their drones, supplied their weapons. Take it down and the rest of their ships would fall, but to take it down we'd have to fight through the swarm, and fight we did. The first volley hit us before we cleared the atmosphere. Plasma fire lit the sky, slicing through our ships, turning men into fireballs. The air was full of screams, static curses shouted in a dozen languages. We answered with everything we had. Torch cannons roared. Missiles built from scavenged parts streaked through the void. Hunters screamed as their own weapons cut through their own ships, stolen and turned against them. I flew low, weaving through the wreckage of satellites and debris, firing until my hands shook, until the smell of burning metal choked me. One of their fighters locked on, plasma bolts slicing the space around me. I rolled, felt the heat blister my skin through the hull. Then I cut behind it, aimed and fired. The blast tore it apart. Shards of armor spun into the black, and for a moment I let myself believe, but belief doesn't stop death. One by one our ships fell. Men I'd fought beside for months screamed as their craft spun into the void, their bodies burning up in the silence of space. Turner's men, the Brazilians, the Russians, all gone. We were winning inches, feet, at the cost of miles of blood. And then I saw it, the stronghold looming ahead, vast and terrible, green light pulsing like a heartbeat. It wasn't just a station. It was alive, a hive, a beast, a god, and we were the knife aimed at its heart. The Legion's last push was chaos. Ships screaming through fire, weaving through wreckage, slamming into the strongholds. Surface, men pouring out, rifles blazing, boots hitting alien steel. I landed hard, the hull of my ship scraping sparks as I skidded across the surface. The hatch blew and I stumbled out into the void, my helmet sealing, my rifle in my hands. The stronghold stretched in every direction, black metal glowing green, hunters pouring out of its veins like ants from a nest. We charged. Plasma fire lit the darkness. Men screamed as they burned, their bodies spinning into space. Hunters fell, their armor sliced open, their blood spraying black across The void, I fought like a man already. Dead, every breath a gift I didn't deserve. My knife flashed, my rifle roared, my hands bled. One hunter loomed before me, taller than the rest, its armor scarred, its mask etched with trophies. A leader at roared spear raised, and I roared back. We clashed. The spear carved sparks off the steel. My knife found its seam, plunging deep. It struck me across the chest, ribs shattering, blood flooding my mouth. But I didn't stop. I drove the blade deeper, deeper, until its roars choked into silence. It fell, twitching, its mask cracking against the metal. I ripped the spear from its hands and raised it high. The men around me roared, voices echoing across the void. We weren't prey anymore, we were predators. The push carried us to the heart of the stronghold, a vast chamber pulsing with green light, veins of energy stretching into the black. At its core, a reactor throbbing like the heart of a beast. We planted charges, every last explosive we'd carried, every drop of fire we had left. But the hunters came, dozens, hundreds pouring into the chamber, their roars shaking the steel, their weapons blazing. Men fell around me, cut apart, burned alive. The air stank of blood and ozone, the floor slick with gore. The charges were armed, but someone had to stay. Someone had to make sure they blew. I knew then it would be me. I stumbled to the console, blood running down my chest, my hands shaking. Detonator blinked red, waiting behind me. The last of the Legion fought and died, their screams fading into silence. A hunter charged, spear raised. I turned, drove the stolen spear into its chest, and spat blood in its face. Then I hit the button. The explosion tore the universe apart. Light swallowed everything. The stronghold shuddered, cracked, split into 1,000 shards. Hunters screamed as fire consumed them, their ships breaking, burning, falling from the sky, from Earth, they said. Later, it looked like a second sun. Hunters fell and Earth stood. I should have died there. Maybe I did. The blast threw me into the void, my body broken, my breath fading. Stars spun above me, endless and cold. My chest burned, my blood froze, my vision darkened. But as I drifted, I felt no fear. I felt pride because we had done it. We had shown them we weren't prey. We were hunters, and Earth would never be forgotten. They say fragments of the stronghold burned across the sky for weeks, that the hunters never came back, that other species hidden in the shadows of the galaxy saw the fire and whispered a name they'd never known before: Earth. Humanity, the prey that turned, the prey that hunted back. And maybe somewhere in the ruins, in the blood and ash, my bones are still floating, my knife still clutched in my hand, my scars written across the stars. But that doesn't matter, because the message is what matters. The hunters thought they had hunted every species, but they'd never hunted us. Not really. Now they know, and the galaxy will never forget.